There's a moment in every woman's life when she stops warning, stops explaining, and just leaves. Not out of anger, not to make a point, but because she's finally done trying to prove her worth to someone who never saw it. He thought you'd always be there, that your love was endless, that your patience had no limit. But the truth is, even the kindest heart gets tired. And when you finally walked away without a word, that's when he realized the silence he never respected would be the one that haunted him most. He got comfortable, not in a loving, safe way, but in a careless way, the kind of comfort that makes people stop trying. In the beginning, he noticed everything. The way you laughed, the way you cared, the way you showed up for him even when he didn't ask. He appreciated you then, but over time, that appreciation faded into expectation. What was once special became routine. He started assuming you'd always answer, always forgive, always stay. He stopped seeing your effort because he had grown used to it. Like a song that played so often, he forgot how beautiful it sounded. That's what comfort does. It blinds people. When someone believes your love is guaranteed, they stop earning it. He didn't realize that every text you sent, every plan you made, every compromise you offered came from choice, not obligation. He mistook your consistency for permanence. He thought you were the type who would never walk away, no matter how many times he ignored your needs. And maybe for a while you believed that too. You told yourself he just needed time. You made excuses for his lack of effort, convincing yourself that love meant patience. But love isn't supposed to be one-sided. It's not meant to feel like convincing someone to value you. At first, the small things hurt, when he stopped saying thank you, when he stopped asking how you were, when he started showing up halfway and expecting you to meet him the rest of the way. You felt it, but you didn't speak up at first. You hoped he'd notice. You thought if you kept giving, he'd remember what made your connections so special. But he didn't, and every time he took without giving back, a part of you began to pull away, even if you didn't see it yet. What he didn't understand was that comfort can only last so long before it turns into carelessness. He thought your love was endless, but love has limits, especially when it's not being nurtured. You were still kind, still present, but something inside you started to shift. The things you used to tolerate began to feel heavy. The conversations that once brought you closer now felt like work. You began to realize that being loyal to someone who doesn't see your worth isn't love, it's self-betrayal. And that realization changes everything. You didn't plan to leave. Most people don't. But one day, it just clicked. You woke up and felt empty, not because of what he did that day, but because of everything he didn't do for so long. You were done waiting for him to see the difference between your presence and your absence. You stopped explaining how you felt. You stopped fighting for his attention. You didn't leave with anger. You left with clarity, and clarity is the quietest kind of goodbye. When you finally walked away, he was shocked. He thought you'd never do it. He thought you'd always come back, the way you always did before. But this time was different. This time, you weren't leaving to teach him a lesson. You were leaving because you'd already learned yours. He started replaying everything, realizing how much he took for granted. The kindness, the effort, the love that came so freely, all gone. That's when he understood that comfort had cost him something irreplaceable. Now he's left with the silence he once ignored. And that silence is loud. It reminds him of what he lost every time he scrolls through old messages or catches himself wishing he could feel what he used to. But the truth is, you can't take someone for granted forever without consequence. Because eventually, the person who once gave everything learns the hardest truth of all, that walking away from someone who stopped seeing your worth isn't loss. It's self-respect, and that's a lesson he'll remember long after you're gone. There comes a point when you get tired of explaining yourself to someone who's already decided to stop listening. You reach that moment after giving chance after chance, hoping that this time he'll finally see you, not just the surface version of you, but the woman behind all the effort, the loyalty, patience you used to tell him how you felt, what you needed, and how his actions hurt you. You tried to bridge the gap between who he was and who you needed him to be. But every time you spoke, it felt like your words fell into a void, and eventually you realized that no matter how clearly you spoke, he was never going to hear you the way you needed him to. At first, you thought communication was the answer. You believed that if you explained yourself well enough, if you showed your heart enough, he'd understand your value. You tried to make him see that you weren't asking for too much, just the same effort, the same care, the same love you gave. But he got used to your openness. He knew that no matter what, you'd always try to fix things, that you'd always come back with understanding, with softness, with another chance. And in that comfort, he stopped appreciating the depth of your love. There's something deeply painful about realizing you've been trying to prove your worth to someone who's already benefiting from it. You kept showing up, kept forgiving, kept hoping that one day he'd realize what he had. You thought your love would inspire him to grow. But love doesn't grow where it isn't valued. It begins to shrink. Slowly, you stopped explaining your feelings because you were tired of hearing your own pain echo back in silence. You stopped trying to convince him that you deserved better treatment because, deep down, you began to understand that convincing someone of your worth is the opposite of living it. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual, like a quiet turning of the tide inside you. One day, you go to text him how you feel and you stop mid-sentence. You realize it doesn't matter anymore. The same words that once felt like a plea now feel like a waste of energy. You stop needing him to validate your pain because you start validating it yourself. You stop needing him to see your worth because you've started remembering it without his acknowledgement. And that's when everything changes. The silence that follows isn't cold, it's powerful. When you stop explaining yourself, you reclaim your energy. You stop feeding a dynamic that drained you for so long. And that silence speaks louder than any conversation ever could. Because suddenly, he notices. He notices that your energy isn't the same, that the warmth he took for granted is gone, that the texts aren't coming in, that your tone isn't soft anymore, that you no longer ask where things stand. He starts to feel the distance you once tried so hard to prevent, and that's when it hits him. Your absence isn't about revenge, it's about realization. He begins to understand what he ignored for so long, that your love was a privilege, not a guarantee, that your patience had a limit, that you stopped explaining because you were done negotiating your value with someone who was never going to pay attention. And that's the moment he feels the loss. Because nothing haunts a man more than the woman who used to over-explain, suddenly going quiet. You didn't walk away to make him regret it. You walked away because you finally respected yourself enough to stop begging to be understood. You realized that real love doesn't require convincing. It doesn't need a defense. It's seen, it's felt, it's valued, and when it's not, it's withdrawn. So when you stopped announcing your worth, it wasn't because you lost hope. It was because you found peace. And that peace became louder than every word you ever spoke, trying to make him see what he was losing. He thought you'd always be there because you always had been. Every time he pulled away, you stayed. Every time he got distant, you reached out. Every time he disappointed you, you forgave him. He mistook that pattern for permanence. He assumed that because you were consistent, you were unshakable, but what he never understood is that consistency is a choice, not a guarantee. You weren't staying because you couldn't leave. You were staying because you believed in what you were building. You wanted to give it every chance to work, every ounce of your patience, every drop of your heart. But consistency without appreciation eventually turns into exhaustion. At first, it didn't feel like he was taking you for granted. He just seemed distracted, busy, comfortable, You told yourself it was just a phase. You believed that if you stayed steady, he'd remember what he had. You kept showing up, giving your best, hoping your loyalty would remind him to match your effort, but it didn't. It only made him believe that your love was unconditional in a way that required nothing from him. He thought he could come and go as he pleased, knowing you'd always be waiting. That's the thing about people who get used to your consistency. They stop trying to earn it. There's something dangerous about being reliable in someone else's life when they don't know how to value reliability. He thought your presence was a given, not realizing that it was actually the result of hundreds of quiet decisions you made: to forgive instead of resent, to stay instead of walk, to hope instead of give up. You were showing up every day not because you had to, but because you wanted to. That's what made your love powerful. But when he started taking that power for granted, your heart started to shift. The same consistency that once kept you together started to feel like a cage. You began to feel the imbalance, the weight of carrying the emotional work for both of you, the frustration of realizing you were showing up for someone who didn't meet you halfway. You started to notice how one-sided the effort had become, how much energy you spent holding something together that he wasn't fighting for. And slowly that realization began to change you. You didn't stop caring overnight, but you did start withdrawing emotionally first, then physically. The things that once hurt deeply began to matter less, not because you stopped feeling, but because you stopped hoping. When you finally decided to go, it wasn't impulsive. It was the result of countless moments he ignored. Every missed opportunity, every broken promise, every "I'll do better" that never turned into action. You had given him consistency, but he gave you complacency. You wanted partnership, but he gave you patterns. You wanted growth, but he gave you excuses. So one day, instead of fighting for another chance, you quietly chose yourself. You stopped waiting for him to realize your worth. You stopped trying to remind him what he stood to lose. You simply walked away, and that's when he finally understood what he had. Because consistency is only invisible until it's gone. The texts that used to come without fail stopped, the warmth in your voice gone, the patience he always relied on vanished. He started to feel the weight of your absence, the silence of your effort. That's when he realized that permanence isn't something you can assume. It's something you earn. Now he's left replaying every moment, wondering how he didn't see it sooner. Wondering how someone who was always there could just stop being there one day. But that's the thing, people don't just leave out of nowhere. They leave when they realize their presence has been mistaken for obligation. You were never permanent in his life. You were a privilege he failed to appreciate. And now the consistency he once took for granted is the silence that teaches him the hardest truth, that love doesn't disappear suddenly. It fades slowly and silently in the absence of reciprocity. You could have yelled, you could have cried, begged, or thrown every word you had at him just to make him understand what he was losing. You could have tried to make him see the pain his indifference caused, the loneliness of loving someone who no longer seemed to notice your effort. But at some point, you realized words no longer had power. You had said everything there was to say, and still nothing changed. So instead of another argument, you chose silence, and that silence, the one he never took seriously, became the loudest thing he'd ever hear. Silence is powerful because it doesn't seek validation. It doesn't try to prove a point. It just exists quietly, unapologetically. When you stopped talking, he thought it meant you didn't care anymore. But what he didn't understand was that your silence wasn't about indifference, it was about exhaustion. You had reached the point where repeating yourself felt like begging. You were done trying to explain the same hurt to someone who never tried to stop causing it. The moment you stopped arguing was the moment you chose peace over chaos, and that was the beginning of your freedom. In relationships, people think that conflict is the danger, but it's not. The the real danger is indifference. When you stopped reacting, stopped trying to make him understand, that's when he lost you, even if he didn't know it yet. He thought your calm meant everything was fine again. He thought your quiet was forgiveness. But silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's preparation. It's the calm before the decision to finally walk away. You weren't trying to punish him, you were detaching. Slowly, quietly, intentionally. And by the time he realized it, it was already too late. He had gotten used to the version of you that fought for the relationship. The one who sent long messages trying to explain how you felt. The one who stayed up late talking things through, holding hope that maybe this time he'd change. That version of you was emotionally invested, hopeful, and open. But when that version of you went quiet, it wasn't because she stopped caring, it was because she started seeing reality. You began to understand that love shouldn't require constant convincing, that you shouldn't have to fight so hard to be seen, to be chosen, to be valued. Your absence didn't come with a dramatic exit. It came with small withdrawals, less energy, fewer texts, less effort to fix what he kept breaking. You began pouring that energy back into yourself, and when you finally left, there was no big argument, no door slam, no explosion. Just quiet, because when your heart truly detaches, you don't need closure. You are the closure. That's when he started to feel it. The silence that used to feel like space suddenly felt like loss. He started to notice the little things that had always been there, the check-ins, the laughter, the presence he once took for granted. He tried to reach out, to get the old version of you back, but she was gone. You had given so many chances that your absence became your final message. The one he couldn't ignore, the one that couldn't be debated, the one that finally made him understand. Because silence has a way of echoing, it lingers longer than words. It's in the unanswered calls, the texts left on read, the energy that never returns. It's the quiet that forces a person to reflect, and that's what happened to him. For the first time, he had to sit with himself and face what he had done. He realized that he had been loved deeply and carelessly, that the person who once fought for him no longer wanted to fight. And that's the irony, what he ignored in your presence became sacred in your absence. Your silence did what your words never could. It made him listen. Not to you, but to the emptiness he created. And that emptiness became the lesson he'll never forget, that sometimes the most powerful message isn't shouted in anger, it's whispered in your absence. He thought you'd always be there, that no matter how many times he disappointed you, you'd forgive him. That no matter how distant he became, you'd wait, that no matter how little he gave, your heart would always overcompensate. But love doesn't work like that forever. Eventually, even the strongest heart reaches a breaking point, not because it stopped loving, but because it got tired of being taken for granted. He thought you were his safety net, but what he didn't realize was that you were his mirror, showing him the kind of person he was becoming. And when you left, that reflection shattered, leaving him face with the one thing he never expected, himself. You were never just another person in his life. You were the one who saw his potential when he didn't. You loved him not just for who he was, but for who he could become. You forgave him when he didn't deserve it. You gave him patience, understanding, and space to grow. You believed that your love could inspire him to rise, to show up differently, to care more deeply, to finally meet you halfway. But he mistook that belief for endless tolerance. He thought your compassion meant you'd never leave. And in doing so, he failed to realize that every moment of your grace was a gift, not a guarantee. He didn't see the quiet moments where you questioned if staying was worth it. The nights you laid awake wondering why love felt like a burden. The times you cried silently after another broken promise. You wanted him to change, not because you needed him to be perfect, but because you needed him to see you, to really see the effort you were putting in, the sacrifices you were making, the parts of yourself you were giving away just to keep the connection alive. But instead of seeing your pain as a signal to grow, he saw it as a sign that you'd always bend. That's how people lose the ones who love them most, not in one big moment, but through 1,000 small dismissals. Every time he ignored your needs, every time he failed to follow through, every time he made you feel like your feelings were too much, a small part of your love dimmed. You began to lose faith in the version of him you fell for, and that's when something shifted. You realized that you couldn't teach someone to value what they've already decided to take for granted. You could love him deeply, but you couldn't make him grow. And when you finally left, he didn't understand at first. He thought it was temporary, that you just needed space. He thought you'd come back the way you always did. But this time, it was different, because this time, you didn't leave to make a point. You left because the lesson had already been learned, and it wasn't yours. It was his. You became the consequence of his complacency, the living reminder that love has limits, that patience runs out, and that good hearts eventually walk away when they're no longer nurtured. Now, every time he looks back, he sees it clearly. The little things he brushed off, the affection, the care, the loyalty, they weren't small at all. They were everything. He thought he had time. He thought you'd always be waiting, but he was wrong. And the worst part, he knows it now. You became the lesson he wasn't ready to learn, the one that teaches a man the difference between having love and keeping it. There's a kind of regret that comes from knowing you were loved by someone rare, someone who would have given you the world if only you'd met them halfway. That's the kind of regret he's left with. It's not the pain of losing you once. It's the pain of realizing, over and over again, what he could have had if he just paid attention when it mattered. And that's the thing about taking someone for granted. You don't feel the loss all at once. You feel it in waves, every time you remember what you didn't appreciate when you had the chance. And for him, those waves won't stop coming, because you didn't just walk away, you became the lesson his heart will replay for the rest of his life. You didn't leave to make him regret losing you. You didn't walk away to get a reaction, or to prove a point, or to make him miss you. You left because staying was costing you too much peace. There's a moment when the noise, the confusion, the emotional exhaustion all become louder than your love. When you realize that no matter how much you give, it's never going to be enough for someone who doesn't want to meet you halfway. And in that moment, something inside you just lets go, not angrily, not dramatically, but quietly, peacefully, and completely. That's what true strength looks like, leaving not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself again. For the longest time, you tried to make it work. You tried to communicate, to understand, to adapt. You carried the weight of both hearts, hoping that eventually he'd meet you in the middle, but you began to realize that you were the only one trying, that you were fighting for a connection he kept taking for granted. It wasn't that he didn't love you in his own way. It's just that his version of love required you to keep losing pieces of yourself to maintain it. And that's not love, that's survival. You were surviving a relationship that was supposed to help you thrive. So you stopped. You stopped explaining your worth. You stopped waiting for him to see it. You stopped hoping that one day he'd wake up and become the person you always believed he could be. Because you finally understood that peace doesn't come from changing someone else. It comes from choosing yourself. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need him to feel pain. You just needed peace. And when you realized that peace was impossible while staying, you did the hardest but most powerful thing you could do. You walked away. He didn't expect that. He thought you'd always be there, that your patience would never run out. He was used to the cycle, you getting hurt, you forgiving, you staying. But this time, the silence hit differently. This time, your calm scared him, because when a woman leaves without anger, it's not temporary. It's final. Your stillness wasn't a pause. It was closure. He could feel it. He could sense the difference between a woman who's upset and a woman who's done. And suddenly, he started to realize what your peace really meant. It meant life without him. Now, he's sitting with that realization, replaying all the moments he didn't take seriously. The times you asked for change, the times you tried to talk, the small disappointments that built into distance. He thought your softness would always cushion his mistakes. But now he understands. Your peace wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. You weren't walking away to hurt him. You were walking toward your own healing. You didn't need him to feel what you felt. You needed to stop feeling small in a love that was supposed to make you feel safe. And the irony is, that's when he finally started to feel everything you once did. The absence of your energy, your care, your presence, it's deafening now. The peace you were searching for is the chaos he's living in. Because while you're rebuilding, he's replaying. While you're rediscovering yourself, he's remembering who you were. You moved on, but he got stuck in the silence you left behind. That's what happens when you take peace over revenge. Life does the work for you. You didn't leave to make him chase you. You left because you outgrew the version of yourself that needed to be chosen by someone who couldn't see your worth. You left because your heart was tired of begging for the kind of love it was always willing to give. And in doing so, you found something far greater than validation. You found freedom. Because the truth is, peace is the most powerful closure there is. It doesn't require his apology, his realization, or his regret. It just requires you to stop waiting for them. And that's what you did. You stopped waiting. You chose peace. And in that moment, you didn't lose him. You found yourself. In the end, walking away wasn't about punishing him. It was about saving yourself. He took your love for granted, mistook your kindness for weakness, and believed your patience was endless. But when you finally left, you didn't just disappear from his life. You reclaimed your own. And that's the beauty of it. Because while he's stuck in regret, replaying everything he lost, you're out there rediscovering everything you are. Peace became your closure, growth became your revenge. And the silence he once ignored became the echo that reminds him every day that the woman he thought would never leave did, and she never looked back.